This is all being recorded now. Everything.
I don't have makeup yet. You shouldn't have gone live yet.
I got something terrible going on with my my lighting situation here.
Yeah, that is not pleasant.
Let's see what I can do about that real quick. Oh, that's betterish.
That's what you think.
Well, you guys gonna live with it now. Okay.
Hey Google, set office lights to 10%.
Okay.
Hey Google, set office lights to 0%.
Hey Google, set office lights to 2%.
Sure. Setting to things.
Ah, that's better.
Right. Okay. Are we ready? Anything we need to touch on before we get started?
We're already on air, so no.
Do it.
Okay. Cool. All right. I guess I'll do it.
You're so good at it.
See, I'm changing up my beginning now because you've had me thinking about it all week. Hello, this is Eric Van Johnson, and you're listening to PHP Ugly, episode 109. With me today are my good friends, John Congdon.
That's your change up? Hello?
That's my change up. Last time you're like, hey, you do all the podcasts the same way. Hey, I'm Eric Van Johnson. So now I said hello.
And you introduced me first, which I like. Thank you. And a Baba voice to you too.
And my other good friend, Thomas Rideout.
The year was 1834. The Blank brothers traded government bonds at the exchange in the city of Bordeaux.
Where is this going?
This is the history of the first cyber attack.
Does this tie back to 109 somehow? Because
no, not at all. Not at all.
No, but interestingly enough, did you know if you take 109 minus 105, you get 4, which happens to be the winning score of the Stanley Cup tonight for Eric's Washington
Capitals. Yeah. Washington Capitals.
Coincidence?
Washington
I
Capitals.
think not.
I think not.
Oh, it's going to be a rough episode.
Washington Capitals. Washington Capitals. I actually had it on my list to mention, and John beat me to the punch. For those that don't know. All right. So for those that don't know, we never do this. And I feel like we should occasionally, like maybe every 50 or 60 shows. But if you're listening to this show and you're wondering what you've tuned into, John, Thomas, and myself are all developers. We happen to specialize in PHP, but we're web developers, and we're really geeks at heart. So we kind of dabble in everything. And this is our little weekly get-together where we occasionally talk about coding stuff, occasionally talk about PHP stuff, but always talk about geek stuff. You never really know what you're getting into when you listen to a PHP Ugly show. But we try to keep some PHP. I got some PHP for the show today, I think. So hopefully we get to that. Yeah, it's just some general work stuff. But before we dive into that, Thomas, I know you've got a little bit of a change up this week.
This month.
You're flying solo.
Yeah. Yeah, my wife took the kids on a road trip, and they are gone for a straight solid month. And I should have questioned my ability to care for myself before they left. But yeah, that was my whole first day of them being gone, was wondering, am I actually capable of caring for myself well enough?
Yeah, you know, they call that leaving, like separating, right? You understand? Like after 2 weeks, it's no longer vacation. You've separated.
I wish. No, we're in constant contact still.
So, what have you been doing with yourself? Anything? Wait. I mean, We pushed the envelope on this one, but let's
keep it clean.
I don't want to have nightmares tonight, please.
Lots of cleaning of the house, which took one day, and my miscalculation was that it doesn't get dirty again because the kids are gone. John, are you shuffling papers? Are you shuffling a ream of paper?
Do you really want to know?
Okay, can you mute the mic when you do so?
I did. I opened a beer. It foamed up and spilled everywhere, but it was muted during then. I unmuted and then happened to grab a napkin to clean up. I'm sorry.
And cleaned up your desk with your windshield on your mic.
Please continue.
Yeah, cleaned up the house, realized that the kids weren't there to make it dirty again, so it's just still clean, which means I have nothing else to do. So then video games and TV shows and movies.
John would probably appreciate this, but it was... I know John has a kid turning 4, and it was right around that age, 4 or 5, where my wife and kids had gone to somewhere overnight. And it was probably the first time that exactly what you said. I cleaned the house, and like the next day I went to do something and stuff was still where I put it. It was like the weirdest feeling.
Really confusing.
After living in a house with other people for so long, to wake up day to day and things be where you actually placed them the night before is jarring.
And like, it's not necessarily like pens and pencils, but trash even. Like a beer can. I can just leave it on the counter and it'll stay there for 4 days.
The kitchen is probably the one that brings the most attention, because like I walk in the kitchen, even today, my kids are older, you know, my wife has been with me for a while. I can walk in the kitchen and the kitchen is going to be 95% of the time going to be in a different state than I had left it even in an hour before.
I would say 10 minutes. I have 3 kids. Yeah. 10 minutes is the longest the kitchen stays in its same state.
Yeah. Yeah, it's weird, man. It's a weird feeling.
Yeah, and it feels weird because it feels like everything stopped moving around you. Like it all of a sudden, the pressure of the house, just the air pressure, starts sitting on your chest, and you're like, "Why is nothing moving?"
Have you come to the realization that, like, hey, I haven't talked in like 2 days?
Yes. Yeah. Tuesday, Wednesday, the only talking I did was to the cats, and that was because I needed to talk.
That's the beauty of co-working. You need to find a place to go co-work with people and just get together.
Yeah, I'm going to be doing that next week. I'm going to be going out and taking the laptop with me because I can't. I mean, it's too quiet. It's so weird. And just
the
before
hard life of a remote developer.
The week
from
before
home
they
so hard.
My neighbors, my only neighbors who I could see on a regular basis out my window, moved out. So there's an empty house behind me now.
You probably should have stopped staring at them out your window.
Well, they should have put on clothes.
Cause them to run away.
So that's an interesting concept. Working remote, I've only done that being married. And I hear people all the time talking about how hard it is to working remotely.
Despite what Eric says, I'm still married.
I don't think you realize how not married you are right now.
But that's the point, is working remotely as a single person can be very daunting, and I've never really thought about it from that perspective.
It's rough. It's rougher than I expected it to be. Because
you've only been alone for what? 4 days?
Yeah. I have to develop new habits. That's the thing.
River.
That's the thing, is I have to develop new habits. I have to not take my nap after work, and I have to play with my 3D printer when I want to play with it. And you get into all these habits with a spouse and with kids where you've got time of your day that's already portioned out to what they were going to do.
Wait, you get to take a nap after work when your kids are home?
Oh yeah.
You're assuming it's after work.
No, it is.
How did you manage that?
By being very tired.
Well, I'm very tired too because I work late and wake up early because of the kids.
Smaller.
I get to 5 p.m. and I got to be right back out there and with the kids.
Oh,
Not that I'm complaining. I love hanging out with them, but
it's with teenagers, you have to develop a system of trading off with your spouse, where she gets a nap and you're the one in charge of the kids, and then you get a nap and she takes over, and then you're both in a position where you're well rested and can deal with it together at dinner.
Yeah, that doesn't work well when your wife is with the kids all day long.
That's why it changes when they're teenagers. It's a different system.
Gotcha.
And I've been spending a lot of time in the 3D
Googling of the single man life there, Thomas. We're gonna move on. Jesus Christ, man! The man becomes single, and all of a sudden life is so rough for him.
Okay, again, not single.
Next week, Thomas, or next week, John, he's gonna have like a new sports car that's convertible.
Midlife crisis, full effect.
Exactly. He's gonna go full-fledged midlife crisis.
I'm buying an Arduino and a couple Raspberry Pis tomorrow.
That's not a sports car.
No.
But you can print one, I'm sure.
Not a full-size one.
All right. So you guys might recall.
The newest thing I printed. I'm working on some precision 3D printing stuff.
Get a freaking hobby or something. What are you
3D printing is a hobby.
Oh no, it's about as much of a hobby as Magic the Gathering's a hobby. Do something real with your life here, man. Yeah. What did I just lose some listeners? I think I lost listeners. Man, I just heard a lot of people turn off a podcast.
I'll tell you what, the chat is dead.
Oh yeah, chat is dead. What, John?
Well, you don't have to say that live on the show.
I only say that because I'm very envious, because John still hasn't taught me how to play Magic the Gathering, and I watch it on YouTube, and I got no idea what's going on. I get the basic concept.
Wait, no. I've taught him. We've only played a couple of games.
You've never taught me. We've never played a game. We went through the card deck like that one time in Chicago, and then
that was like 4 years ago.
Spicy,
and then the hookers got
lights turned down. Yeah. But I watch it. I understand, because John has been explaining it to me. I understand some of the concepts and how the cards work, but I got no idea how to play it. I've never played a game of Magic the Gathering. I don't know where my cards are anymore. I gotta find my cards again.
I think I might have them.
That might explain why I can't find them.
Yeah, I've been playing since the first edition way back in the 90s. And I showed up to Tech a few years ago with my deck of cards, which I guess is no longer even a real deck. You can't even use these cards anymore.
Why? Because they're not powerful enough, or
no, it's just they're different. It's just older.
Yeah, they introduce new systems every cycle, and the rules change quite a bit.
Oh, really? The rules change?
I don't think the rules change that much.
That's stressful now. Now I'm stressed.
Like the core rule set stays the same, but the rules for like new card formats change. Like when they introduce planeswalkers and stuff like that.
Hey, Thomas, you know what doesn't change? Washington Capitals won the Stanley Cup.
I heard.
Did I ever get around to mentioning that I'm actually from Washington, D.C.? I was born in Washington, D.C. So, fun fact, when I was born in Washington, D.C., my dad was born and raised in Washington, D.C., and a lot of people on the West Coast struggle with the concept of the Northeast, because the West Coast, the states are so large, the counties are so large, that the idea, when I worked in Maryland, which is actually where I ended up living, I had a job where I drove from Maryland to Virginia to DC, and then I would briefly touch on West Virginia, and then we had other drivers that drove out to Delaware and back in the same day. And you tell West Coast people that, oh yeah, I used to go through 2-3 states a day, which is very easy to do in the Northeast here in the U.S., and they can't get their head around it. So I typically tell people I was born and raised outside Washington, D.C., because they seem to know where that is better than they know where Maryland is. Like, Maryland's just not one of those states that like everybody just comes to mind and say, "Oh yeah, I know exactly where that is." It's not like New York or any of the big Northeast states. But I was born in Washington D.C. Actually, grew up in Maryland, but it's kind of all the same area. I mean that the Capitals when I was a kid. The Capitals played like very close to the neighborhood I grew up in, Maryland. They actually played in Landover, Maryland. Now I think they actually moved their stadium to Washington D.C. But yeah, it was. I'm very excited. It's a big deal, man. I like it.
I caught the last 2 seconds of the game where they had an empty net and icing. I guess there was icing and there was 0.6 seconds left on the clock. And I guess they actually go back and review the tape to make sure that the timing is correct.
Mm-hmm.
So it was interesting. When I saw they won, I knew you'd be excited.
I don't follow basketball.
Oh, stop it! But the NBA finals are going on, and Golden State Warriors are killing it.
Yeah, I don't follow hockey either.
All right. You may recall a couple of shows back. It's like I had a premonition or something. It's so bizarre, but I had mentioned that how much of a realization I came to about how much proprietary code base is hosted on GitHub servers. And we had a little bit of a conversation about that, and like, should we feel weird about it, and how do people deal with that, and that was pretty much it. It wasn't a huge conversation.
I don't recall this conversation at all.
I don't either. But
are you being funny?
No, neither of us remembers this conversation at all.
Oh, really? You're going to make me have to go back and find the show where I talk about how much proprietary information is on GitHub?
Yeah, I'll hold.
just based on that. So I can narrow down the search to shows that John missed, because I think John would have remembered it. You, not so much. So
remember what?
That doesn't narrow down my listening schedule that much. But I promise you, a few shows back, we had this conversation about how much proprietary code base is hosted on GitHub.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well,
tons. All the private repos on there.
That became a pretty big topic of discussion lately when Microsoft went from a Friday afternoon of, hey, there are rumors Microsoft might try to buy GitHub, to like by Sunday morning, Microsoft has bought
Saturday.
GitHub.
It turned around in like 12 hours.
Oh, it was crazy. Microsoft purchases GitHub.
First off, all this speculation is stupid. Because everyone's like, oh, I'm leaving GitHub and moving to GitLabs. It's like, you know who's for GitLabs? Google.
Well, I liked a lot of the tweets that came out saying you're stupid to be concerned about that when you're giving access to your code base to all these other CI/CD, like all these other companies that you give access to your GitHub account. What do you care that Microsoft has access to it?
Right.
Well, I think the idea is that Microsoft can. There's the perception that Microsoft would definitely have more of an agenda and more resources to push to analyze code bases to kind of get a sense of what's happening out there, what's being built. Whereas like the CI tools, they don't care. They're doing CI. They're not. It's Google. Secret. Why do you keep saying Google? We're trying to have a conversation about the Microsoft acquisition of GitHub, and you keep throwing out Google and GitLab.
Because the thing that people keep doing is saying, "Well, I'm going to leave GitHub and I'm going to go to GitLabs," which is Google, which is just the same giant company.
What do you mean is Google? Google owns GitLabs? I don't think so.
They're the primary VC for GitLabs.
They still don't own it. I mean, being a VC doesn't mean that you have access to the hardware, that you're working with the code base.
Well, you haven't watched Silicon Valley then, because Silicon Valley is about that entirely.
Okay. Well, I would really like to talk about GitHub and Microsoft.
Go on. Okay.
So the thing that I struggle with, and I understand, I checked my bank account recently and I realized I'm not a rich person, but the acquisition was for like $7 billion in stock.
5, yeah.
Yeah, in stocks, and it wasn't a $7.5 billion cash transaction, but it was a $7.5 billion worth from Microsoft. All right, let's go with that. And the thing I struggle with is like, I'm just doing my math, and let's just say for a moment that GitHub pulled down $1 billion a year in revenue. That's not even profit. Let's just say they pulled down $1 billion a year. That would take Microsoft over 7 years to start to see a return on that. And I think we can all say with a good deal of confidence that GitHub isn't pulling down $1 billion a year. So help me out with this, because I always struggle with this. It's like, where is the return on investment on this for Microsoft?
I don't know. Yeah, but Microsoft probably already has access to the user base.
No, not at all.
Yeah.
Remember that Twitter, despite being worth billions, is still running negative annually.
And this is exactly my point. It's like, how is it worth Microsoft spending $7.5 billion? Billion with a B. That is so much worth. That is much.
Now, okay.
What do you get?
You're gonna give me shit about this, but I got to go back to Silicon Valley. I binged the latest season of Silicon Valley, which is about mergers and acquisitions for the first half of the season and why you do it. And the thing is that in purchasing GitHub, they don't just get the domain name and the source code and the servers. They get all of the employees who are very, very valuable. You've got the people who are the best of the best in redundant infrastructures with high rates of data being hit against it.
Think that's not an unusual acquisition? So you think this was a talent acquisition? You think that, which would be a terrifying thing to assume, because typically with talent acquisitions, the product they're being acquired from kind of falls to the wayside, because that talent gets redistributed within the new company.
Not necessarily redistributed. It depends on how they decide to do things. But remember that there's many aspects to what you get when you get a company like. So the reason it was big news for everybody is because GitHub has developed a brand over the last 5, 6, 7 years that is incredibly valuable. So if you want to brand something as GitHub certified, GitHub authorized, GitHub remote, GitHub desktop, all that stuff, that brand is incredibly valuable entirely on its own.
Let's make a note. None of those are things.
None of those are things yet. But if Microsoft wants to sell a box that says it's a local GitHub distro.
You're going to sit here and tell me, you're going to look me in my virtual face and tell me GitHub verified anything would carry more weight than a Microsoft verified anything?
GitHub by Microsoft might not carry more weight, but it will have
not GitHub by
value.
Microsoft. Not GitHub by Microsoft. You're saying one of the benefits was that they've acquired this brand, this name, that carries all this weight.
So they can say GitHub desktop or GitHub something.
But Microsoft has that.
Right, but they don't have that. They don't have that in the open source market. They are, even though they're moving in on open source, they don't have that brand recognition for Microsoft. Oh yeah, those open source guys. And so they're buying brands that represent open source software, and they're keeping those brands. Now they're not renaming it from GitHub to Microsoft Hub or Git Microsoft or whatever, something stupid like that, because the brand has an inherent value in the community that says this is open source. This is code bases. This is developers. This is not a marketing platform. This is a development platform. You know, GitHub has a reputation, and they're keeping that reputation. It's just being owned by Microsoft now, and Microsoft's going to move it in the direction they want to move it. So if Microsoft decides they want to launch a competitor to Apache, then they'll launch it off the GitHub brand or something similar to that.
And you think that's worth $7.5 billion?
I think that's part of it. That's step one. Step two is the employees. Step three is the technology. Step four is the hardware and back end. You know, they've got data centers that are just their data centers.
End of day, how do you feel about this? John, you first. How do you feel about this acquisition?
So, reading a lot of the things that are going on Twitter, when I first heard it, I was like, oh crap, I don't like this. Then I saw a lot of positive tweets about it, in the fact that, again, like I said, we already trust a lot of our code to these third-party companies. So what's the difference with Microsoft? And then I was turned around again when somebody said, look at Skype. You know, Microsoft buys Skype, and Skype is now horrible. I used to love using it. It's my primary phone when I'm in my office, because that's how I take calls, I make calls. And it's the things they've done to it recently are horrible. So I see both sides of it. I'm terrified of what they're going to do to it. Are they going to just let it go by the wayside? But at the same time, there's a good chance they may be able to pump resources into GitHub and make it much better.
Well, Skype was a Ballmer project, too. That was the Microsoft that was several years ago. It is not.
They just went through a major revamp too, so you can't continue to play the Ballmer card on that one.
Yeah, I mean, there's still changes to it, and it's still being updated, and it's not getting any better. You know, I mean, stupid things like I used to be able to hit a key combination and be right at the dial pad. Now I hit the key combination, the dial pad comes up, but then I have to go click in the stupid dial pad to type in the numbers. That is frustrating to me.
Yeah, no, I agree. The whole thing with Skype is stupid.
Yeah. And something else happened with John. You and I tried to do something, and we're like, I have no idea how. I think we tried to add somebody to a call, and it was like,
no, we figured it out. It's just they changed it and made it way harder to do than it used to be.
All right, what's your thoughts on it, Thomas?
I'm going to go with friend of the show, Michael Drinda here, and say that we have been talking for about a year now about the crazy things that Microsoft is doing. And it wasn't until a few months ago that I understood why Microsoft is starting to do this open source stuff. And it's the head of the development team right now, Satya Nadella. And it's a completely different Microsoft than it was under Ballmer. There is an embracing of open source, an embracing of Linux. They've teamed up with Docker. I feel like I say the same things every episode, but
it's funny you use that word, embracing. We can circle back around on that. Go ahead.
We will. Oh, we will. I see a Unix or Linux-based Windows in the future. My guess is that it will be a server architecture first, running C# or any of the other specific, Microsoft-specific languages, as well as the other Linux architectures that are available.
Which we've been speculating on that for a while, yeah.
And this is a step towards that.
Okay.
Where they can get people to start developing for the Microsoft platform on GitHub. I wouldn't at all be surprised if there was a get this app button on GitHub soon that let you just download the latest version of some software. They don't want to get into the App Store game. They've tried it and failed, and that was, again, Ballmer's thing. Ballmer wanted an App Store. It failed miserably. Their sales were, in the range of 5% of what they were on any other platform. So they released Gears of War and stuff like that exclusively on the Windows Store platform, and they didn't sell anything until they were released on Steam or GOG or other platforms. It just, no one wanted it, no one used it. I think we're getting away from the proprietary kernel and getting into open source Microsoft, which, if you look at how they're selling Windows now and how Mac sells OS X, it just doesn't make sense to sell software anymore. It makes sense to support software. And owning GitHub is a big start in supporting software.
Okay, so let's unpack a couple of those things because you guys never ask me my opinion, so I'm going to go ahead and give it to you anyways. For starters, I agree with some of the things that you mentioned, Thomas. I do think this is part of Microsoft's play to become more open source. The concerns I have. So first thing, there's this fantastic historical memo from Microsoft about how they would destroy open source by embracing it, expanding it, and then eventually killing it. And there are those conspiracy theorists out there that says this is it. This is Microsoft finally embracing open source so that they can kill it. I would like to think that's not the case, and I don't think that's the case. But here are the issues with what you said. The biggest one, and you've ranted a couple times about, oh, that was Ballmer. This is what's his name? Who's running it now?
Satya Nadella.
Satya. That was Ballmer. This is Satya. Well, what happens when it's whoever after Satya? And they decide, no, we're going back to the Microsoft of old. Screw all this open source stuff we said we're going to do. We're not making the billions of dollars we made when we started the internet.
Well, that's why Satya Nadella is in charge, is because Ballmer almost tanked Microsoft.
You're not listening to me. You're not listening to me. This whole company construct, the whole theory of the company has changed from one CEO to another.
Yes, there's been a paradigm shift.
And we're supposed to say, okay, this is great. Life is fantastic. Woo! Open source is strong now. But what's to say that doesn't do a complete shift the next time there's a turnover at Microsoft? Or what if this is used to say, okay, look what this guy did. He took us down this open source path. Microsoft stocks have plummeted. We're not making the money we made. We need to bring somebody else in here. What happens to these properties like GitHub? I want to be clear. I want to be clear. I don't think that they're doing anything to try to destroy open source today. I don't think that's their objective. I do think that their hearts are in the right place. They're trying to embrace they're trying to embrace open source. But this is a large proprietary company that can pivot the entire ship. And it might take a year or two, but they can do it. They've done it. Nobody would have ever thought when Ballmer took over for Gates that he would have been out as quickly as he was, which might not have been quick enough for a lot of people, and then for the entire company to make this sort of shift. So you can't sit here today and tell me, well, there's no way it will ever shift back.
No, I'm not saying it won't shift back.
But that is kind of what you're putting out there. That's kind of what you're putting. But wait a minute, I'm not done. No, hold on. You've had your 45 minutes of rambling about this. I get mine now. Here's my other issue with this. Here's my other issue with this. This is very much, we're all fathers here. We all have children. This is very much your young child coming in the kitchen and seeing you cook and say, hey, you're cooking. I can cook really well. It's the same concept. It's Microsoft. It's even worse. It's Microsoft saying, wow, we're this huge company. We've made a name for ourselves. We've got power in this industry. Hey, look at this open source stuff. We can do this. We can do this better than any of you. We're going to start doing open source. And they're getting these properties like GitHub thinking we can do this so much better. We can help here. We can help. When in the reality of it is maybe they can't. Like there was no reason for this acquisition to happen. I still stand behind the fact that I don't think that they'll ever see a return on this GitHub acquisition from
what, in 30 years?
From revenue from GitHub. Yeah, no, because there's going to be a cost, because $7.5 billion, dude. They have to make $7.5 billion over expenses. In value. Let's say value.
It's not real value. It's in shares.
Okay, perceived value, whatever, Thomas. It's value. Microsoft's stock has to go up $7.5 billion.
They had that stock, so if they kept it, they had $7.5 billion.
No,
right?
They gave
it's value. It's value, Thomas. It's value, or GitHub wouldn't have done it.
Yes, but if you have a stockpile like what Microsoft has of your own stock, then you can't just dump it and liquidate it to cash. If you announced a liquidation of $7.5 billion in stock, you have to announce it weeks in advance. The market will tank the value of the stock, and you'll lose billions.
Please get to your point, Thomas. Are you saying that wasn't really $7.5 billion in value?
Yeah, to Microsoft, it's not really $7.5 billion. To GitHub, it is, but to Microsoft, it's not.
To Microsoft, it is, because they could put that $7.5 billion worth of stock into GitHub or something else. It's still a value of 7.5
something.
And there have been reports now that the running cost of GitHub is hovering at about $300 million. So
a year or a month?
Yeah.
Which is something that Microsoft will immediately fix.
Thomas, I don't know how I can have a conversation with you.
They'll run it on their own servers.
How can you just make that unilateral decision? Oh yeah, Microsoft will run it for less. They'll make money off. You can't say that
because they're bigger.
But they're not doing it now. They're not doing it now. They didn't do it with their Visual Source Safe. They've already failed at this.
I love your passion.
I am passionate about it.
I'm saying that it's not just like they handed $7.5 million over and got the name and the code. They've got the CEO, the CTO, the CFO. They've got all of the engineers. They've got all the hardware and software.
You keep saying that, and that is a huge red flag. Because what are they going to do with it? They're going to just say, "Okay, you guys continue working on GitHub." No, if it's a talent, if it's a talent acquisition, no, because then it's not a talent acquisition. Then you're saying they're buying the company.
You said it was a talent acquisition. I didn't say that. I said that part of the deal they're getting is incredible talent, but they're also
but that talent is worthless if you don't use them other places in your company.
But you're also able to fold in operating expenses into your current operation. And you also...
Thomas. All right, Thomas, you're right. I don't know what point you're trying to make. You're right. Let's move on.
My point is that it's $7.5 billion is a number that's very flashy for headlines, but is not really relevant to the transaction that occurred.
I don't understand that statement or how that implies to any of the points that we've been trying to make around some of our concerns, but whatever. Okay.
Well, so... If it's
go ahead.
If you've got 1,000 shares of stock and they're all valued at $1, and you give somebody $500 worth of your stock, you don't need to make that $500 back. You need to value the company at an additional $500. So they may not make $500 the same way that Twitter might not make any money, but Twitter's value on the market in shares is billions. So GitHub doesn't have to make money for Microsoft to make money. GitHub has to add value to the shares.
This is our point. This is this is what we've been saying. Are you saying that this GitHub acquisition is going to add over $7 billion of value to Microsoft?
Probably.
Okay.
We'll see.
Clearly, all of the people who are in charge of Microsoft believe it to be true. And they're far more well-educated and experienced than I am in this market.
No, and I see what you're saying there. My concern is that they have hundreds of billions of dollars, so 7.5 billion is like a few bucks to us. Like, I'm just gonna throw this money over here. Still a lot of freaking money, and how does it add to the bottom line?
But Microsoft wouldn't be doing it if they weren't going to get value out of it. If they didn't believe that there was a 5, 10, or 15-year turnover for the $7.5 billion to stay the same.
It's definitely going to be interesting to see what happens.
Yeah, yeah, exactly, John. It's done now. Let's see what direction this goes in. I mean, let's hope it's not Skype. Yeah, and the good thing about it is there are alternatives out there, right? I mean, whether it's GitLab, whether it's Bitbucket, which it's funny how little conversation I've seen around Bitbucket through all this. Everybody's talked about GitLabs, but
they tweeted a congratulations to the GitHub team.
Yeah, definitely. Congrats to the GitHub team. I mean, if you can get that kind of money,
they're going to see anything from this? You think they'll get some of that $7.5 billion? No, they still make the same paycheck they always made.
Who? Get the people at GitHub?
Yeah.
Oh,
maybe they get better health insurance.
No,
they had, especially the core team, they had stock options in GitHub, so they're going to get a good return on that.
Those aren't really worth anything.
I would guess like 150 of the core employees are going to see massive payouts on this. I mean, like the guy who painted the mural at Facebook. Do you know that story, Eric?
I don't know it.
There was, when Facebook was starting up, they hired a well-known graffiti artist. They made a joke about this in Silicon Valley. They hired a well-known graffiti artist to paint a mural in the office. And he said, I don't want money, I want stock. And so they gave him like 200 shares or something like that, which meant that at the time that I read the story, the mural was worth $1.5 billion.
We used to have our meetups at a place that...
Assuming you still had the stock.
He did.
Thomas knows for a fact that he did. He just had lunch.
There was a documentary on it.
We used to have our meetups at a place that did that. They hired a artist to come in and paint their office, and it was so cool. It was like an art museum walking through that place. I love, like, that's one of those things. If we ever got to that level, I would love to be able to splurge on. That
was that you?
Yeah. That it was just I've always been such a fan of that, and I'm sure, I don't know, another 10 years from now we'll all look back and go, oh god, that was so tacky. But I've always been a fan of like the really nice graffiti art.
I already think it's tacky.
Yeah.
Surprising you and I don't see eye to eye on something, Thomas.
What?
That's amazing. All right. Wow,
I've just been here live to listen to you two go.
A long conversation.
Yeah, it's about to get longer. Did you guys watch WWDC?
Parts of it, yeah.
Yeah, very little of it.
Yeah, it was terrible.
No, it wasn't, Thomas. It was awesome. They're a fantastic company. They're doing great things.
I know you. No, you can't argue with me on this one. It was awful.
I don't care about it. I'm not a Apple developer. It was a developer thing.
Yeah, everyone keeps pointing that out. It's a developer conference. You're not going to see much hardware. No. It's all the new OS stuff and nothing.
Anything in particular that you hated, Thomas? I'm sorry, John. I cut you off.
No, I'm excited about the dark theme stuff. I'd like to see it when it comes out.
Yeah, that was the whole thing. It's like the one thing everyone remembers is the dark theme and the walkie-talkie. And
what was the walkie-talkie? I missed that piece.
The Apple Watch can now do PTT communication if you spend a long time setting it up and the other person has an Apple Watch.
Yeah, that's always been one of the challenges with Apple products. I mean, even they're like iChat. iChat's great, but it only works if you live in the Apple ecosystem. So,
yeah, I have friends that are all about the what do they call it? iMessage.
Yeah,
and if you're not, if you can't communicate with them, you're in the dark ages. I'm like, no, you can still use other things. There's lots of other options.
Yeah, it was just further isolation of the.
To their defense, they've done a great job at, if you live in our ecosystem, life is a Garden of Eden. Simple. And Microsoft tried that, and Microsoft failed, and Apple's pulling it off. But there's a huge expense at doing that, and there's a huge limitation to it. That's what kills me. It's like when they're talking about like a lot of these new features, especially around the iPhone. It's like, that's not new. That's so old. It's I don't know. I guess ignorance is bliss for Apple users.
That was the thing that caught me, is they basically, their new version of their OS caught up with Winamp circa 99. And
I want to go that bad. What are you talking about?
It was a dark theme, and like people stood up and cheered.
People stood up and cheered because they're like, finally, it's here. And they've been waiting for it for so long. Because a lot of the apps themselves are putting that in there. It's now I can have it in the OS itself, like across all my windows. And
that is one of the things that I did notice about watching this what is it, WWDC? Is that it?
Yeah.
Yeah. Watching this one bothered me probably more so than watching any previous one. It's the equivalent of the laugh track when you're watching a comedy. The way people applaud is so on cue and so much over the most minor things. And this is me as a developer saying, well, no, that sounds small, but that's really huge. No, I mean, that's nothing. Why is everybody clapping about that? It's like, look, my phone unlocks with my face. It's like, oh my God, it's been doing it. That's not even a new feature. It's already been doing that. The clapping at the WWDC, not only is it irritating, but it sounds so staged. It's like it doesn't even sound like general excitement anymore. It's just
like the State of the Union.
Yeah, like somebody's flashing an applause sign and people just start clapping because the applause sign starts going. It's weird.
We need that on the show.
Something on this show.
John, you have a story for us that you almost told us after the show last week, and we had to tell you not to tell us the story.
I have no clue what you're talking about.
You could tell us this week. You brought down some database servers?
I did?
That's what I heard. Were you high?
I mean, that's nothing new for him.
So the funny thing last week was all of a sudden everything shut down on a client site and I had no clue why. And it turned out it was because they were using Proxy SQL. And they had rules set in place to send certain queries to replica servers, which is great. Like let's send these slow queries that usually happen on the master server over to Replica 2 because it's on SSD. That's their use case. What I didn't take into account was in some testing I was doing, I'm like, I'm going to store some information into a database. And in that temporary database, I was storing some other SQL queries. Those SQL queries matched Proxy SQL. So it would send the insert that was supposed to go to the master over to a replica. And after a handful of those, everything stopped because replication stopped as IDs mismatched. So if you don't understand MySQL replication, you insert on the master, it goes to the slaves or the replicas getting the same IDs. What was happening in this case, I'd do an insert, not thinking of it, because of the way he was doing query matching. It matched the query that I was storing within the same record, sending it to a replica and doing the insert actually there. So a millisecond later, when it got the same ID, replication stopped. And over a course of a few minutes, replication stopped on all the replicas. So the queries that were being forced over to the replicas failed because the data wasn't there. Everything just stopped working. Fun times. Yeah, that's not fun. Lesson learned: don't store queries.
UUIDs helped you there?
No, not at all. Because
it was the record IDs. The way MySQL does syncing, it has these individual record IDs that are not tied to the columns.
Actually, no, you're right. You're right. UUIDs may have helped in that case.
Thank you. Right. That's exactly why I asked if UUIDs would have helped, Thomas.
Yeah.
Everyone knows UUIDs are obsolete.
UUIDs would have helped, although I would have had orphan data, but in this case, it was a temporary table. I didn't care. Like, I just deleted the records off the replicas and said, no big deal. But you're right. UUIDs in that case would have helped.
Yeah. Yeah, so we're working on a pretty big project. It's a greenfield app, and I'm using UUIDs all over the place. And of course, the team is getting nervous about it. I'm actually getting a little nervous about it as well, because
why is that?
The same concerns that we had the conversation when we started this project, so I'm kind of rehashing it. I don't know if we did it on air or not, but the overhead of a UUID, the extra indexing of UUIDs, and I don't know. I'm just getting nervous about it. I don't know. We'll see. I mean, we'll see if you read these articles about how UUIDs will bite you in the butt if you're not careful, which I get that. And again, the argument can be made with not using UUIDs, like the issue you had with just using normal incremental numbers. That can bite you in the butt. So there's it's always a trade-off on risk. And I don't know, the one that keeps haunting me is the don't use varchar 36, which is what a UUID is typically stored if you're using it as a primary key. And the issue I have with that, because again, it has to do with the overhead of the indexing, and how much space it takes. I think we're geeks, and when we talk about this stuff, we do have a tendency to talk about the extremes of it. It's like, oh yeah, if you ever reach Facebook status, your database is going to cripple. So I'm kind of leaning on that. Like, okay, I don't think we're ever going to be big enough where that's going to be a huge problem, but it's like in the back of my head because it's such an important element of the record itself. It's not easy to change. I mean, if we decide 5 years from now that UUIDs are killing us, that's a hard switch to make.
But that's why they're generated the way they are now, though. With using UUIDs generally use date and timestamp information to generate their unique ID.
Yeah.
And
no, it has nothing to do with uniqueness. It's the
no, I know. I'm saying that the reason that they do it that way is because when you break the varchar down into binary and then you index the binary values, which MySQL should be doing, then it creates a very well-ordered list that's searchable just as well as incrementing IDs are. It shouldn't have that overhead anymore if you're using a modern method for. I remember older method for UUID generation, which was random characters, and that's not the way it's done anymore.
Right. Because
of this indexing issue, is that now when you create UUIDs, they are incrementally indexed because of how they're generated.
I hope you're right, because I'm all in on UUIDs, and I'm still a fan, but yeah, I'm very a lot of this greenfield app are kind of my work, my patterns, my thoughts, my implementation. So I'm very concerned about things not working. 5-10 years down the road. But I mean, again, we're all in on UUIDs. They're in this greenfield app all over the place. Like the kind of the direction developers have is explain to me why this shouldn't be a UUID, and we can talk about it. Otherwise, the IDs need to be UUIDs. Interesting thing that I did read, and I would like you two's opinion on this. One of the reasons why I wanted UUID was because I like that method of if you have to expose an identifier, like in a URL or something. I definitely like the UUIDs as opposed to something that can be incremented through. So I'm perfectly comfortable with throwing a UUID in the URL. And
you still shouldn't do that. You should hash it first.
Okay, so and that's what I read. Somebody said just because it's a UUID, don't think you can expose that to the public.
They're not truly random anymore. Like I said, with the use of the date information in there, they lost their randomness, but they gained their indexability and some behavioral predictability. So
I'm not overly concerned about randomness because I mean they don't have to.
But it's not necessarily secure, but it's better than an incremental ID.
Yeah, it's better for like the couch hacker, but for the government hacker, it means it's a very small speed bump for them.
I'm the couch hacker. In previous lines of work, I hit competitions websites because I realized, all I have to do is pass an order ID into here, and I can get all the information about orders on their site.
Yeah.
So, and then I would just scrape and figure out how we were doing compared to them over time.
Yeah, and the thing is, UUIDs aren't a whole lot better for anonymity or for that sort of guessing patterns thing than incrementing IDs are at this point.
You just don't get the data quite as quick. You still get the data, but
not as quick. And if you use it for scenarios where I want something to be secure across a line, I'm doing communication with a third party right now, and we definitely don't want them having our user IDs, so we have to have some way of generating a hash, and we're still using incrementing IDs internally, but externally we don't use them at all.
Are you using UUIDs externally, or are you doing something else?
We're generating a hash. We're just making something up and then tying it to the record. That is pure random characters.
Interesting.
But with our business and with our likelihood of getting hacked, we get attacked, I would say, 150 times a day. I just wouldn't feel comfortable.
I bet it's more than that, but yeah.
No, I have a graph.
No,
it's roughly 150 times a day on average. Because for some reason people think we run WordPress, but I would never be comfortable exposing an ID or a UUID. I would have to hash something.
I mean, the argument I have with exposing UUIDs, is in the edge case that a database does get compromised. No, that's not even a good argument because it's the same even with the incremental IDs. I still don't see a huge risk with exposing UUIDs. I mean, you're claiming that people can still but can still guess through
iterate,
iterate through UUIDs. I don't know.
I mean, I don't know how it works, so I'm making an assumption that based on date and time, you have a range, and you're still incrementing, but you're going to get a lot of not founds at this point, and then you'll get a hit, and then a lot more not founds, and then a hit. If you're trying to do incrementing IDs,
yeah,
and the thing is that
it seems like you can help just by implementing other methods of security. You could probably catch a lot of that.
It gets tough.
All right, so let me throw another thing past you guys. This is another thing I'm struggling with. This is another decision that I made that I've kind of gone all in on, and I'm happy with, but it's one of these decisions that I have to keep talking my developers off the edge on because it's a struggle to wrap their heads around. And I recently come to an epiphany of, oh shit, this might be a problem in the future. But it's polymorphic tables. Before I explain to listeners who might be listening, do you guys understand what polymorphism is when it comes to database relationships?
Yes.
Okay. So for those who are listening, and you guys are more than welcome to jump in and tell me if my understanding is incorrect. But a polymorphic table is basically when you you're working with a relational database, and typically the relationships are pretty one-to-one. You know, a user has whatever,
an address, an email address,
an address. Yeah, that's perfect. A user has an address. A user has a phone number. And the way you manage this can be pretty weird, because like, okay, maybe the user can have 4 phone numbers or something weird like that. Well, what a polymorphic table allows you to do is it allows to have multiple relationships. So a user can have an address, a company can have an address, whatever can have an address. And instead of creating a company address table, a user address table, a whatever address table, you just create an address table and you set it up so that you're able to understand, oh, this address belongs to a user, this address belongs to a company, and that's how you do it. And there's a lot of ways of doing this traditionally with databases. That's a pretty simple example. Sometimes people put address type, which is another approach, but that has a lot of limitations to it as well. The idea behind polymorphic is you never know in the future what you might need to attach an address to. So with a polymorphic relationship, you have that flexibility. So I've been pretty all in with polymorphic tables for this Greenfield app. And it's, again, one of these things I have to talk through with the developers to kind of get their heads around it, because it's not clear cut. Because what's weird is, like, on the user table, there's no address ID. Like, if you were to look at the user table, you would know that there's a relationship between the user table and the address table.
But there shouldn't be.
Right. And so you just know that you can go to an address table and see that relationship.
But I think on the address table, you don't see a user ID. I think that's what you really meant there. You go to the address table, you don't know it goes to a user ID.
No, that's actually not true. It's actually just the opposite. You do know that, because if you look at the address table, you see that there's a user model and a user ID associated to that record. But if you're in the user table, you don't see that relationship. Okay.
But you shouldn't normally, because those should be one of many relationships.
Okay.
It shouldn't be a one-to-one relationship.
So that's not my concern. Let me explain to my concern. And I know, John, your Jedi powers with the sequel is strong, so I'm kind of leaning heavily on you. The thing that I came to the realization to today is, as our database gets bigger, and as developers, we're constantly going directly into the database and doing database queries of, okay, let's stick with the addresses. Addresses is super simple. That might even be a bad example for what we're talking about here, but let's stick with addresses.
I want to get specific here for one thing. Are you talking about Eloquent model polymorphic? Or are you just talking about generally polymorphic database?
I'm talking specifically about Eloquent model polymorphic.
Okay, that's important, because Eloquent does things in a specific way.
Yeah.
But it's still polymorphic tables. I don't know the difference there.
The type points to an exact instance of a class.
It won't be relevant with my concern. Yeah. That maybe you guys can help me with. As developers, we're constantly going in. So, like, again, with the address situation, this might be a bad example, but we will look up. We'll do raw SQL queries of looking things up directly into the database without going through code bases, without going through models. And I'm really concerned by removing that model layer, that I'm handicapping users in the future who need to, or not users, developers in the future who might need to do raw SQL queries. So, for example,
not at all.
No, it's just another where clause where you put the model name in the where clause.
And not even that. You're using UUID, so assuming there's no clashes, there's no issue anyway.
UUIDs are supposed to be unique to the table only. They're not supposed to be unique to all objects. In theory.
I just read this today.
You guys, please don't.
UUID stands for Unique Universal Identifier. I mean, it's literally the name.
It's supposed to be unique across everything, not a single
And as a matter of fact, I create like the way it gets created through Laravel. It's not. I mean, you can say it's unique to the model, but it's not unique to the table because MySQL isn't creating the UUID.
No, I know.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay. What Thomas said isn't wrong. You can add the type into your where clause and you're good.
Okay, so that's one of the things I thought about, but how does that work? Because the type that's being captured is the model, but that model doesn't necessarily translate word by word to a table.
Yeah, it does. In Eloquent, it does. The model name is the table name.
Not necessarily.
You can override it. But by default, Laravel has a list of the plural forms of all the single words that models are, and it uses that for the table name.
But what gets stored is the full model path. It's not users. It's /app/ in my case /app/ models /user.
Yeah, so as long as you know it's user, it doesn't matter what the table name is. When you're doing your join, you join to users or prefix _ users or whatever. You do your join.
But again, you're making the assumption you know what table you're joining to.
Yeah, if they're doing raw SQL, I would assume that they have to know that.
Yeah, that's true.
Okay.
If you're joining to the users table, you have to know that the users model is model users.
Shouldn't be worried about it.
No,
not at all.
I do it all the time. Now I regret it. Every time I do polymorphic stuff, I regret it.
Why?
Because I don't like any of the use cases. The classic use case is sharing media. Is it a photo or is it a video? Videos have different attributes than photos do, but they have shared attributes, but they deserve their own model because they have runtime and encoding type and stuff like that. And to me, it's just like, if I have a media model and I ask it for the runtime, and there's a chance that there's no such column on the model that I'm using, then I'm doing something wrong. Like, it's either fixing a problem that's not really a problem, or it's creating a new problem. I could understand, where polymorphic stuff comes from is in complicated objects in high-level languages, C++ and stuff like that. That's where all the polymorphic stuff comes from. PHP has polymorphic classes, but they're not nearly as powerful as most other compiled languages. And they're used for very...
Wait, PHP has polymorphic stuff or Eloquent does?
PHP does.
What am I missing there?
I'm getting to it. So the thing is that polymorphism works really well in an environment where you have inherited types, where you have abstract classes that are being defined by interfaces, and all of the abstract classes share interfaces and have relationships to that interface that always respond the same types and things like that, where really complex scenarios. Applying polymorphism to database models, to me, it just seems like you're either trying to get rid of a pivot table that you shouldn't get rid of, or you're trying to squeeze everything into one table that shouldn't be squeezed into that table. And every time
I disagree with both those comments. Just FYI.
Every time I use polymorphics in MySQL, I feel like all I did was eliminate one pivot table, and it causes me. And it causes me.
How's that fair?
Not one per relationship.
Yes.
Right. Because again, yeah, one per relationship. Yes, that would be a fair statement. Yeah.
Yeah, and I very rarely do a polymorphic for more than 3 different types. So it's all I've done is eliminate 2 pivot tables.
See, to me that seems beneficial. It seems like you keep the database cleaner. Data integrity seems stronger. I don't know.
It's never felt like it for me. I've done it probably 10
well,
times.
I'll let you know. Ask me in about a year or two how I feel about polymorphic tables, and I'm sure I'll have opinions for you.
Yeah. The example that comes to mind that I actually use it in is tags, where you can tag users, you can tag folders, you can tag other data, but you only want to have one tag, and each tag can apply to different elements within the system.
Sure, but if you're not using an interface for your models that are members of the polymorphic relationship, then you're going to accidentally call on a non-existent property of an object. You will.
I'm not too concerned about
that. I haven't had that issue yet.
Okay, so I have another development question for you now.
You also have to use instance of all over the place.
This is almost like we're actual developers talking through problems here. Yeah, so like I said, feel free to ask me about polymorphism in about 2 years and see if my opinion has changed. But
I'll give you a tip though. I need to give you a tip. You're going to use, if you use polymorphics, you're going to use switch instance of variable. And you're going to have case photo, case video, case MP3. You'll see that in all your templates.
Not so much now the way I'm using it.
I'll ask you in a year.
Yeah, feel free. Because the implementation we have, the cases are so dramatically different that they don't really overlap that much. Currently.
Then why are they being polymorphically joined together? If they're so different, then why are they being related to each other?
Yeah, that's a good question. And Ted Nugent in our chat is bringing up a good point that you're taking referential integrity out of the database at that point. So in the case of an address, you delete a user, you're not going to be able to delete all of their ancillary data.
Why not? Because you have the user ID. Why wouldn't you be able to? Matter of fact,
the database itself is not going to take care of it because you don't have foreign keys on that.
Oh, and you know what? And again, this might be why it's making it easier for me. I thought about that scenario, John, and with using UUIDs, it actually becomes much simpler because I don't have my polymorphism. That's not the I have a way of establishing that relationship outside the polymorphism because since the polymorphism is capturing those UUIDs, if all I have is UUID, I can say, okay, find every record related to this UUID. So that's
in every table. How does that work? If I delete,
very poorly
using the right now
optimized way of doing something.
Right, but using foreign keys, I can delete from my user table, and because of cascading deletes, it deletes all of that user's data. With polymorphism, you can't do that.
That's true. You can't use cascading deletes. You are correct.
No, you have to put the cascade into the delete action of your model.
Right, and that kind of comes back to what I said. The user table has no understanding of a address ID or anything like that. So
which is what Ted is saying. Ted is saying that you're taking that burden off of the database and putting it into the code.
Right. So, and I agree with that. Yeah. But again, using UUIDs, I still have another avenue of doing that. So I do agree.
So going back to Thomas's point, if you only have 2 or 3 of those types of relationships, you're saving 2 tables instead of having a user address table, a location address table, and I don't know, some other address table.
And
you just want them all in addresses.
And because I'm the database expert here, I'll tell you,
but it's more than
table columns that have frequently stored the same data. So image, video, image, those tables index very, very, very poorly. If you're always storing one of 2 values, very poor indexing, especially on a string, which is the way Eloquent does it.
Right. And I don't want to get into too much detail around this application, but the other thing with polymorphism is, yeah, you're right. If all you have are 2 or 3 data types, you're saving 2 or 3 pivot tables. But then, then you have to add a fourth or fifth or sixth data type, and now you have to add a fourth or fifth or sixth pivot table, and there's that whole scalability in the future. Again, not getting into too much information about the application I'm working on, but I foresee that as being more of the challenge of, okay, we have this new thing here that needs these properties. It needs an address. It needs a phone number. It needs a product. It needs this. It needs that. And that one added thing all of a sudden translates into 10 pivot tables without polymorphism.
Sounds like you need JSON objects.
Well, that's interesting you say that. That's another thing I've been working on implementing, but that's another story, and not what I want to get into.
I knew that before I said it, which is why I said it.
Yeah. So yeah. I mean, we're trying to be very basic here with our discussion around users and addresses, but it gets a lot more complex as you start to talk into some of the edge cases that we're working in the requirements. Okay, so the other thing I want to bring up, and the reason I bring this up is because I saw it come through a Twitter stream. Adam Wathan mentioned it, and it kicked off this whole conversation on Twitter. I'm like, wow, this is kind of a conversation we've had in the past, a challenge that we've addressed with a little bit of a twist on it, and it has me thinking down this road again, and I'd like to talk through it with you guys. So what Adam Wathan starts to talk about is, he says, what's the best way to build a Vue SPA with a Laravel backend? And he's the gist of the tweet is, should this be a single Laravel application with all the SPA stuff in the existing resource, or should the because it's Vue, should the Vue piece be a separate application from the backend? And this led into other conversations of, we do it this way because it allows our front end guys to have their repo and the back end guys to have their repo. And we kind of have gone down this path before when we talked about these API driven architectures, which is something we flirted with and kind of implemented poorly a few years back. Whereas, okay, API, the idea behind the API driven architecture is you just create all these little separate APIs and everything's a separate repo. This is kind of the same thing. Is, okay, your front end is a different repo. It's a different application. That code is not intermingled with your backend code, which in this case, in our case, would be a Laravel application. Thoughts, opinions? I mean, I kind of see the validity of both currently for our application. So we're taking this approach where our front end is a SPA. It is a Vue-driven SPA, a Vue.js-driven SPA, and our back end is Laravel. We've matched it all up into the same repo. But what the arguments that are being made here make a lot of sense to me. Thoughts, opinions?
So what did they say the benefits are? Being able to deploy faster?
I think I didn't read through all the tweets. I do think deployment did factor into it. It allowed the front end guys to do things in their repo and to deploy, like you said, on a more regular basis without impacting or potentially impacting or even having the concern of impacting any of the backend code. But I think a lot of it got around to just, the front end people can work on their front end piece, the back end people can work on the back end piece. And I realize this doesn't apply to all of us. Some of us kind of do everything, so we just keep it all together. But we're talking like maybe a bigger project here.
Yeah, it's going to come down to the developers you have. Do you have a separate front end team from your back end team? In that case, it makes sense. But if you have good processes in place of deploying code, of first reviewing, merging, and deploying code, does it really matter if you're deploying the backend code if it hasn't really changed? Or are they trying to prevent front-end developers from changing back-end code?
Yeah. I'll paste this in Slack. I'm sorry. I should have done that before I started having this conversation, so you guys could have seen the tweets. But yeah, you see that is that was actually one of the first conversations. One of the people who posted, Sam Slickoff, which is an awesome last name, says some of the trade-offs, of course, having to deploy two applications. He brings up E2E testing is harder, end-to-end testing is harder. Yeah, I guess I can see that as well. Yeah, I don't know. I mean, I'm kind of in the mindset of, yeah, keep it all as one application. I mean, the only argument I could possibly see with this is, this would apply to a big company, of course. I've actually worked through this scenario in the past, is when they want to iterate or do a complete revision change of a front end, and they have a team working on a new front end, and having to rip out that old front end and put in the new front end, it can get messy, and typically does get very messy if it's all the same repo. If it's completely separate repos, and the front ends are just taking advantage of API endpoints. Somebody spins up a new front end, it tests, it works, it goes, and you don't have to worry about it. I mean, that's one of the arguments I see for it. But that is seems like such a, how often are you going to say, okay, we don't want to, well, I guess we just went through this actually. I was going to say, how often do you say, do you get done with the project and you say, okay, we don't want Vue anymore, we want to go to jQuery? Actually, we recently went through that.
Nightmares.
Yeah, and it was a pain, and that was another example of, that was a pain, because it was so embedded in the code base, and you had to pull all this stuff out, and you had to make sure you pulled it all out, because otherwise, even if it's not being used, it's a point of confusion for developers in the future. It's like, hey, why is this Vue component in here? Where's this being used at? So it makes for a very unclean repo. Yeah, I mean, but again, that's the only kind of scenario where I see kind of a real benefit to it. But I don't know. That's why I thought I would ask you guys.
Yeah, I'm still all in favor of keeping it together. Just put the proper processes in place.
Thomas,
but
any thoughts?
That's because I'm a jack of all trades. I do a little bit of everything.
Yeah, and I think that really factors into this a lot. Is I did have this in my show notes. I'm sorry, you guys. I should have just moved that over. Boom. Yeah, that conversation piece. Yeah, I get that. And yeah, this seems like, yeah. Again, if you're using, offshore development, or if you don't have an in-house development team, there could be some arguments, being made of, hey, I don't even want my front end team to see my back end. I don't even want them to know how it works. I just want them to interact with API endpoints.
Yeah. Well, I will move us on from that, because I don't think there's going to be a good answer for it.
I have to say, I heard about the SPA stuff and splitting up into multiple repos in, I believe, 2014. And you know who I think told me about it?
Adam Wathan?
I believe it was Wave PHP speaker Jesse Decker.
I like how you worked that in there. Wave PHP happening in September 19th through the 21st here in San Diego. Buy your tickets today.
Yeah, I'm a big fan of the split it up into two parts, front end versus back end.
Are you?
Allow something like Apiary to run sort of intermediary, so both components look at Apiary. One of them hits Apiary as an API and does its API-based testing. The other one hits Apiary as a provider and gets provider-based testing. I like that kind of organizational technique.
Yeah, that makes sense for development, but we're talking about, where do you store the code? does the code go into two different repos, or is it stored all together?
Yeah, I don't see why not. Two different repos. And they're very easily. I mean, if you're looking at Vue and SPA, then you're definitely looking at something that is a standalone application outside of Laravel. Vue is not intended to speak to Laravel a whole lot. It's supposed to get everything dynamically, and I think that organization method helps keep that abstraction the way it should be.
I guess I just haven't seen a big application that takes advantage of that, and I haven't been involved in the deployment process of that. So at that point, are you putting it on two different domains or subdomains where you're hitting an API somewhere else? Or is your deployment process basically just smushing the two code bases together in the same host?
All I can say is the place I've seen this is in non-PHP development. I see it in JavaScript development and like plugins for Chrome and stuff like that, where there is a code base as well as a front end that are two separate entities running on different systems. React is very, very popular in the plugin coding world. And you can see a lot of applications that use React in its own project folder, but within the same Git repository, separate from the node code that's running the back-end portion. I would develop SPA apps in the same way.
I just want to throw something out there. You know we're having a great show when we're an hour 27 minutes into recording and John is still moving cards over. It's like,
yeah, I was about to say.
This must be a good show. John wants to keep talking. We must have a good show going here.
Yeah, I was about to say something about that. Like, we're running really long, but this next one came up, I think, last episode where we were talking about how Echo Device was listening in on a couple that was having a fight or something and sent their conversation to a contact of theirs.
Right, and the media blew the story out of proportion.
Oh, extremely. And my wife was commenting on it on Facebook and telling me how scary it was. And I understand the concern, but you got to go back to the sequence of events that happened. And it sucks ever since then. I mean, we have a couple of Echo devices in the house, and we'll just be sitting there on the couch watching TV and say something, and all of a sudden the blue ring lights up, and she looks at me. She's like, "It's listening."
Okay,
and
that's the part that has been freaking me out lately.
The fact that it just kind of starts spinning like I'm listening to you.
I have always operated under the subconscious assumption that yeah, we know that we've got these eavesdropping devices, but when they only operate when they hear a trigger word, and when they hear a trigger word, it sounds off a sound, it displays lights, and it waits for an action to be told to it.
Mm-hmm.
And this latest news discloses that that's not how it works. That Facebook has dozens of trigger words in the application, and when the trigger words occur, it takes different actions, but none of them notify the user.
Right. Well, we haven't even gotten to the story yet, because we're talking specifically about the Echo devices last time. And I think Eric even pointed out, we've been carrying cell phones in our pocket for years, and they have microphones, and we haven't thought twice about it. And now it's coming out. And I think you guys even did a test with bikinis or something.
Yes.
Where you were
bathing suits. Yeah.
And we did it wrong.
Yeah.
We did it wrong for sure, because I saw how it was done correctly. There was the article you're referencing. This guy did it correctly, and it's terrifying.
Well, and John, were you on the phone? Were you on the phone? Were you on the show when I talked about our experience in Vancouver and the houseboats?
Mm-hmm. Yep.
Okay. Yeah. So that was one of those cases to bring people up. I don't know what show it was, but yeah.
That was the one before we talked about. You started talking about you were going to do a week or two where you're talking about bathing suits. Right?
No, that was actually
this was recently. He wasn't on the show when we talked about the houseboat thing.
Oh,
then no. It's not. Oh,
that was
holy
just
smokes.
me and you.
Okay, so John, why don't you talk about your story, because we've been kind of talking over there, and then I'll recap the houseboat story to you.
Oh, I'm done. Thomas was taking it over there. He was talking about the phones and how it's come out that you guys did the test wrong.
Right. So as you recall, the whole idea was that your phones are always listening. Facebook specifically will customize ads based on conversations it picks up, or this was a theory. Conversations it hears, whether it's being triggered or not. If you just have Facebook on your phone, it would do that. And we on the show, we tried a test. We all launched the Facebook app, and we had a conversation. And I felt like it was in the middle of winter, but we had a conversation about needing to buy bathing suits.
It was the middle of winter.
Yeah. And the idea was we would watch our Facebook stream to see if we started to see ads about bathing suits, because it was a very weird conversation for us to have. We all agreed that we never had ads about bathing suits in our Twitter stream. And so it seemed like a valid test. And, as Thomas said, he might have found some flaws with our testing method, and we never said it was a scientific test. So that doesn't. But end of day, we never saw bathing suit ads.
Right.
However, and this is to bring you up to speed, John, I recently went to Vancouver and had a fantastic time. I love that place up there. Gorgeous, gorgeous. I so wish I could have a reason to live up there for 3 or 4 months. I don't know if
now you're going to start seeing ads for Vancouver.
I don't know if I want to live up there through the winter, but I would love to live up there for a while. But anyways, my wife and I were walking around, and she just so happened she got on Facebook, and she was posting something, and we were walking past these houseboats, and I said, "Wow, how much do you think it costs to live on one of these things?" And we started talking about these houseboats, which are these homes that live on the water. If you live in some landlocked country and don't know what I'm talking about. But they're not houseboats that you typically take out. They're actually full-fledged homes that are on water. And we started talking about it. And that night, we get back to our room. That night, I'm sitting there and I'm catching up on work. And my wife goes, "Oh, how weird is this?" I'm like, "What?" She goes, "There's a Facebook ad on here on cost for houseboat homes in San Diego where we live." And I turned around and looked at her. I'm like, "Are you serious?" I'm like, "Did you search for houseboats when you were on Facebook?" She goes, "Why would I search for houseboat homes on Facebook?" And I'm like, "Let me see the ad." And she showed it to me, and there was the ad on her phone, on her Facebook feed, about buying houseboat homes in San Diego. And I freaked the fuck out.
So wait, she had Facebook open when you were talking about this, or
yeah. So we were walking. I remember it very. I remember it very specifically. We were walking along the water, and in Vancouver, we were on this I forget what it's called, some island or something, and there were all these beautiful homes, and she was checking her Facebook feed as we're walking, and we're having this conversation about houseboats. Yeah. I can verify she was on Facebook, because I remember seeing her on Facebook, and as we're having that conversation.
End of day, we give apps so much access to our devices. They pop up and say, "Hey, can I have access to your contacts?" And so often we say yes. Lately, I've been downloading, just stupid games just to play for a few minutes here and there, and they want access to pictures and location. It's like, no, but how many people just say, "Okay, you must need this"? Yes.
Oh, then the damn app won't work. It's like, well, I can't show you this pretty picture of a cat if you don't tell me your location. It's like, wait, what? Right. What the hell are you talking about?
Okay, let me jump into that, because that is my article here. That is an API called Alfonso. They pay companies to be included in their games, applications, et cetera, it requests location access and microphone access. And it supposedly uses this access to listen to what television ads you're watching, to try and identify what show you're watching, to try and identify your demographic, to present ads that are demographic specific to you on Facebook and the games and other things like that. But this is not open source or even audited software. It could be tracking everything that's being said and sending it to the end users, to the servers. It's really crazy stuff. And to go further into John's article here, Facebook, there was a recent large leak about what data Facebook is selling. And then there was this one guy who realized that the Facebook algorithm is using keywords the same way home devices, Echo devices, all those are using it. So we did our experiment and we said bathing suit, stuff like that. But what these algorithms are actually looking for is people saying in a conversation to someone else, hey, you know what? I'm thinking about going back to college. And so it hears the, hey, you know what? I'm thinking about, and then it tries to listen in for something it can target.
Yeah. Well, to our defense, Thomas, we did have a conversation around bathing suits. We didn't just say bathing suit. We just, hey, we said something exactly along that lines. Hey, right. You know, we need to think about getting bathing suits.
Now, again, our issue there was that it was the middle of winter, and we weren't at a mall or something.
Would have made it weirder.
So the second prong of the way that these systems work is that they use location data in combination with the spoken data. So if you're at the mall at a swimsuit store, then it will start targeting swimsuit ads. Or if you're at a coffee shop and you're talking about going to community college, then it will take it more seriously than if you're sitting at home. If you're at Petco and start talking about cat food, then it cares about it. Yeah. So it's using this location data in combination with the voice data to do these identification patterns. And then along with all of the other data that it's scraping from websites, because the Facebook Pixel is on every single website now. So anytime you look at something on the web, Facebook knows what you were looking at and uses it as part of its marketing system.
Which Safari is now blocking it, aren't they?
They're saying they're going to. They're going to fail.
Yeah.
I mean, Safari might succeed, but Safari itself has failed already, so who cares?
Yeah.
It makes up like 8% of traffic.
All right. I know we're super long here. I do want to throw out one other thing that, and I'm only doing this because it's news relevant. It's very current. And I know we'll be the first ones to talk about it. Did anybody catch the? We're all fans of Ed Finkler here. He's done an amazing job with OSMI, and he's huge in the PHP community. Did anybody catch his tweet today?
Did not.
No.
So I linked to it. It's in Trello. I did link to it. His tweet is, and I'll quote it as soon as it comes up here. Oh, and I skipped over something completely different that I want to talk about too. But his tweet here is current status. 1, I like my workplace a lot. 2, I think I'm pretty much sold on Python as my future. You heard me correctly. I think I'm pretty much sold on Python as my future. As a huge, I still to this day think that had I not going down the path of PHP, I would have been a Python developer. A lot of that has to do with the fact that I was in operations before I was a full-time web developer, and Python is really strong there.
Yeah, but then if you were a Python developer, wouldn't you be a Node developer by now?
That's a good point, yeah.
So, I feel like everyone left Python for Node.
No, not at all. No, Python is a massively strong, strong user base, strong community, very, very interesting and fun language to code in. But how do we feel about
figure out the different versions of 2 or 3 or whatever I'm having trouble installing at the current time.
Yeah, there's not a Python. I can talk about a lot of that. I don't want to get too much on that, but this isn't the first time this has happened. If you guys remember, a few years back, another very prominent PHP developer, Phil Sturgeons, Sturgeons kind of did the whole Marvel MCU faded into dust in the PHP community because he became kind of a full-time Rails developer. He still contributes and he still does talks and stuff, but his focus was on Rails. And we just had the conversations of the benefits of separating a front end from a back end. This kind of can lead into that. It's okay. We talked about switching out the front end, but what if you want to switch out the back end? What if you want to add a back end, which is something we didn't talk about, where you have a Laravel app and then you have a Python developer that comes in and says, oh, hey, I'm going to create this one Python backend, and you don't have to worry about mixing all the repos because your front-end developers, everything's just an API call to them. What do we think about this? Is this a reason of concern, or do we just think?
No,
no, okay,
not concern, but Python is the language for all of the piracy applications.
What?
Python is very, very popular in certain communities with
no. Let's be honest. Python is popular across the board.
No, I know that. I know, yeah. but when there's a good chance when I'm downloading a server style application for my Windows machine, it's a Python application.
Okay. I don't understand your point.
So I see a lot of places where I wish I knew Python.
Oh, you do. I can guarantee you, somebody like you, Thomas, you know Python. You haven't been taught the intricacies of the language, but it wouldn't take you any time at all. Like today, you could look at Python code and say, oh yeah, I understand. That's always been my thing about Python. Almost anybody can read Python like it was a book. There's some caveats.
It's pseudocode.
Yeah. There are some caveats, like they don't have the concept of arrays. They have lists and dictionaries and things like that. Or their arrays are called lists and dictionaries, and they behave a little differently. But in general, any one of us, well, obviously me, but you guys could easily sit down, look at Python code, not only understand what it's doing in general, but have a pretty good idea around the details around how it's doing it. Python's a great language.
Yeah, Python's great, but I think Node is the new and shiny right now, and that if I was going to get into something along those lines of terminal level scripting, I would look at Node before I look at Python.
Right. And I think that's always been one of the areas that Python struggled with. As the web established itself, we're talking years ago, as the web established itself and became more and more popular, Python really didn't forge a path in web front end. It continued to live as a back end development language. And
what was the CGI? Was the CGI extension Python?
No, Perl.
Perl, right?
Yeah. So I think that was. Because otherwise, if something like what's the Python framework called for web? Oh geez, I just did an app in this the other day, not too long ago. There's a micro framework for Python. Let me look at that real fast. But had something like Flask. Had something like Flask, taken hold when the web was really taking off. The PHP platform look very different. I think PHP meant a need in web before anybody else got there. And had Python done that, I think the PHP landscape would look very, very different today.
Oh, yeah. Yeah.
Okay. All right. Maybe it's not that big of a point. I thought it was... I thought it was interesting. Again, being a Python person, not being a Python person, but somebody who considers himself a fan of Python, this doesn't surprise me. But yeah, okay, all right. I think
we are running long,
way over. Yeah, we're way over, and I'm so happy Thomas has volunteered.
You're back to editing it now.
No. I'm so happy Thomas has agreed to edit this show. Oh man, my weekend has just opened up. This is fantastic. But despite any kind of concerns you guys might have, I know you guys want to go on. I'm drawing a line in the sand. I'm saying we're stopping the show. You guys can continue to try to move stories over, but we're not.
I fell asleep like 20 minutes ago.
Yeah,
no, you didn't. You were the last one to move cards around. Well, okay, I just added a card, but whatever. Okay, this has been episode 109 of
and 110.
I'm Eric Van Johnson.
I'm Tom Rideout.
Good stutter there. I'm John Congdon. Keep it ugly.
Keep it ugly.
Keep it ugly.
Stop the local recording now. Oh my God, that could very well be the longest show we've ever recorded.
We just lost 20 listeners easily.
No, I'm
not listening to this.
We got Ted Nugent the whole time. He's still sitting right here.